Mr. A. Pratt.
Thank you, everybody. It is good to be here and address you guys one more time. It's a good day for liberty, isn't it? Amen. It is good to be here. That's right. So, get that there. There we go. So, it's really good to be here with you all, just as it was fantastic to see people from this state coming up in our time of need last month. Coming up to the rally in Virginia. But anybody here, raise your hand if you were here, if you went to that rally. So look around. There's a few of you that went up to Virginia. Thank you so much. Give them a round of applause, seriously. I really want to thank you for doing that. Because as you all know, we are fighting for our lives in Virginia. The battle of our lives, and of course we had that huge protest on January 20th. Estimates are anywhere from 22,000 up to as many as 50,000 people were there. I was one of the speakers that day, and it was interesting. I just finished my speech, and a little bit later, after meeting with some legislators, I was walking back to the hotel, and somebody stops me and he goes, "Hey, aren't you Eric Pratt?" And I said, "Yeah," and we start talking. Well, it turns out he's from Alabama, and he says he had just become a member a little bit ago of gun owners. And it was interesting as we're talking to him, and I didn't really say this to him, but I'm getting these visions of American Sniper, right? I mean, remember the movie with Chris Kyle, right? But here's why. There's a scene in the movie, and I think he's talking to his wife. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but he says, the reason I fight overseas is because I would rather be fighting the enemy there than here in the streets of New York and Texas and elsewhere. And that's what this guy was telling me. He said, that's why I came up here for the day to Virginia to stand with y'all. Because he said, if we don't, and they pass gun control here, then they're coming to Alabama next. And he's absolutely right. We need to stand together. And I so appreciated that. So I want to tell you all, I think there's some things that you guys can be doing that not only will help you here in the state of Alabama, but also help us up in Virginia as well. So I want to give you a couple of, I know you've already gotten some action items from some of the earlier speakers, and some of these will overlap, and that's okay, because repetition is good for actually taking something and really having it become part of you. But here's some of the things that I actually also told fellow Virginians up at the rally last month. And here's the first point. And I want to be very clear about this. No gun owner should ever again vote for the gun control party. Never, ever again. I'm talking about the party of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Their party is anti-rights, it's anti-gun, and really it has been for decades, only now they're just starting to come out of the shadows and be more overt about their plans. But their party has declared war on the Second Amendment. And whenever they gain power, wherever it is, federal level, state level, guess what they do? They set out to ban and confiscate your guns. So nobody ever, if you're a gun owner, gun owners should not let gun owners vote for the gun control party ever again. Now, I'm sure that everybody here is registered to vote, because I know you guys are an active bunch, although this is being videotaped, so anybody watching this, let me just encourage you, if you're not registered to vote, you need to register to vote. But let me expand this a little bit. And earlier you heard each one reach one, right? Are your adult children registered to vote? What about your pro-gun friends? It was said earlier, you know your friends. Some of them, you don't want to encourage them to register to vote. But you know the ones you need to encourage, right? It is really important to be getting them to be registered and encouraging them before the elections to get to the polls. When I was in college, voting was the last thing on my mind. But my parents actually sent me an absentee ballot in the mail. So, picture this. I'm in my dorm room, and, here, I forget what it was, FedEx or UPS, but they were there with my absentee ballot. And, the courier took it out of The envelope, I filled it out. I think back then I was voting for Ronald Reagan and other races. That tells you a little, my age. And but it was the first time I was voting for president. I put it back in a clean envelope, and off that courier went with my ballot. But because of my parents' example with me, my wife and I have done the same thing with our kids when they were away at school. They taught us how to remain active. By the way, my wife is here with me, my lovely wife over there in the GOA shirt and the BamaCarry hat. Is that kind of like a house divided? Like a Bama? No. Actually, we work very well.
Hey, Eric, it just shows us that you married up. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, it does. And actually, she'll tell you she married up north. Here's the funny thing. She comes from further down south, okay? She's from the panhandle of Florida. And you know what they call themselves down there? They are LA, Lower Alabama, right? And here's what they told her. They told her, Stacy, you are marrying a Yankee. He's a Yankee. Tried to tell her, where was the capital? Yeah, it doesn't matter. But so she married a Yankee. Of course, really the only reason we were there, many of you, if you've been with GOA for a long time, you remember my father was, and he's still, even in his retirement, very active, but he was fighting for our Second Amendment rights for decade after decade. And so that's why we were there outside of Washington, D.C. So I'm very proud to follow in his footsteps. He helped instill a passion for liberty inside of me. And really, like I was just saying, trained me in how to be active. So even if I'm away at school, it didn't matter. I was still to be engaged in the fight. I was still expected to be active. And just because I was away at school, that wasn't an excuse not to be voting, not to be actively fighting for our rights. And so what I'm suggesting is that's the kind of tenacity that we need to have. It's in getting our adult children to vote. It's in getting our pro-gun friends and family to get them to the polls. Make sure that, encourage them, hey, you're going to be around on election day, or do you need to vote absentee if they're going to be out of town, and so on. A lot of times, you hear the argument, well, what does my vote count? One vote is not going to make a difference. You hear that all the time, right? Well, let me tell you something. Back in 2017 in Virginia, the Republican majority in the House of Delegates, I kid you not, was ultimately decided by one voter in one district. Did you get that? One voter in one district determined whether gun control was going to pass in the House of Delegates. And that's because there was a Republican majority, not that all Republicans in the state are pro-gun, but because the Republicans had a majority that year, they killed every gun control proposal that came before them. What a difference an election makes, doesn't it? When the Democrats win the pro-criminal party wins all the levers of power, as they did in 2019, now they're trying to ram gun control down our throats. I mean, in just a few election cycles in Virginia, we've gone from having an overwhelming majority with the one party now to a swing to the Democrat Party, where they're ramming all kinds of gun controls through the legislature. Jan Morgan was talking about this earlier. What a difference, if we get complacent, what a difference can happen if we're not getting to the polls, not getting others to the polls. So that's why we need to be super engaged. It's been said many times before, elections have consequences. But I've also observed this, and I'll draw an analogy here. Just as there are some people who only go to church on Christmas and Easter, for us regular churchgoers, we call those creasters, right? You ever heard that term? If you haven't heard that, then that's being said behind your back, okay? But creasters, well, in the same way, there's people that only vote on presidential election years. We can't be that way. That's not okay. We have to vote in the off-year elections as well. And especially we have to be getting out there and voting in the primaries. Eddie was saying here in Alabama it's one of the worst rates of voting. I bet it's even worse during in primaries. People a lot of times don't even know there's a primary coming up. See, that's where we can be making a difference and telling our friends and our adult children, letting them know. We need to go rhino hunting. And the best time to go rhino hunting is during the primaries, right? You know, I'm talking about Republicans in name only, right? Because after all, and I'm sure you've heard this, but you know, they say politicians and babies are a lot alike, right? They need to be changed often and for the same reason. That's right. That's right. So anyway, that's the first challenge that I want to give to you all here. It's the challenge that I gave to the rally goers there in Virginia just last month, so I give it to you as well. The second challenge I want to give you, this is related to really the example from our founding fathers, because there's a lot that we can learn from our founding fathers. After all, they were not strangers to oppression, were they? On this day, 242 years ago, do you know where George Washington and his men were? They were freezing during their stay at Valley Forge. That was their Valley Forge year, yeah. He had men who died from exposure, influenza, pneumonia. Almost 2,000 troops died during that stay at Valley Forge. And those who didn't die still suffered greatly. They had to deal with things like scabies and typhoid and dysentery. Even George Washington said that the smell of a dead, rotting horse at Valley Forge was almost unbearable. I mean, so these were tough times. So think about it. How did this ragtag group of individuals win a war against a better funded, well-rested enemy, a well-rested army? Well, I'll tell you how. One of my favorite portraits is hanging in my office right now, back in Northern Virginia. It's the portrait of George Washington at Valley Forge in the snow, right? Next to his horse, and what's he doing? Praying. I'm sure you all have seen that portrait as well. And you know, I'm sure that it's embellished like a lot of other portraits about that time. I'm sure George Washington wasn't standing on a small boat as they crossed the Delaware in the middle of a snowstorm either. But okay, you get the picture, right? Many of the people who knew Washington said that's the kind of man he was. He was a man of prayer. And that's why I like that painting. Because for me, it's a reminder of where the real battle is won. I'm glad to see, Eddie, that BamaCarry opens this meeting with prayer. Because there's obviously power in prayer. And George Washington knew this. And so did our other founding fathers, by the way. It wasn't like he was just some weird radical, okay? Listen to the words that Thomas Jefferson penned in the Declaration of Independence. Here, in the midst of a war that they're fighting, they said this, that they were appealing to the supreme judge of the world to give them the help that they needed. The supreme judge of the world. Folks, they weren't talking about the United Nations, were they? No. And yet those are words that every founding father signed his name to in agreement. They appealed to God. They prayed to God. See, we have to beware in the same way that we don't become, and it's important to be active and engaged, but that we become so focused on activism and engagement that we neglect to tap into the most important power. I mean, it's like the popular saying goes, and you've probably seen the meme, when life gives you more than you can stand, then kneel. Right? Even if it is next to your horse in the snow. So anyway, let's not forget the example of our founding fathers, George Washington and others, as stated in the Declaration of Independence. Now let me give you a quick federal report. Let's reel it in here to the present. For right now, things are actually relatively quiet at the federal level, although obviously that could change in an instant. I mean, you know how that works, right? In August, there was a series of mass murders, 3 to be exact, and so the Democrats were screaming, you know, Republicans, get your butts back in here, cut your vacations early, and let's pass gun control. Even the president was picking up parroting that language and saying, yeah, maybe we need, you know, tougher background checks or this and that. We were missing the rootin' tootin'. No, bad guys need bullets shooting back at them. You know, he was going more the other way. Well, here's what we did at Gun Owners of America. And Jan Morgan was talking about how they did this in Arkansas. This is what we did nationally. We rallied our members, emails, postcards, social media, the whole gamut. We generated more than 3 million messages into the White House and into the Congress. It brought gun control to a screeching halt. In fact, we heard that from a very senior, high-ranking Senate office. They told us, you guys killed gun control, and it's because, and it wasn't because of, GOA's whining and dining skills or oratory skills. No, he said, your members have been so loud and so active. See, it's you guys taking action that puts the heat on these guys, because when the media, it gets loud in that echo chamber inside the Beltway in Washington. And so it is important. That's the thing that we specialize in at Gun Owners of America, is getting them to remember where their roots are, right? Remember where they came from. And so we get the grassroots putting the heat on them. That killed gun control. And then, of course, impeachment started right after that, and then that really took everything off the table, but gun control with it. So for now, things are calm, but again, that could change in a minute, so obviously we need to stay vigilant. Gun Owners of America is involved in a bunch of lawsuits, and even prospectively, we're already looking at challenging anything that passes in Virginia. We also have some things that we're looking at with BamaCarry that I can't mention right now, but hopefully you'll be hearing about it soon. One thing that I can tell you about, we're jointly involved with them in a case they're helping us with. BamaCarry is helping us in challenging the bump stock ban. And this is something that is really important to challenge, not only based on principle, because here you had an agency just out of thin air writing a ban into quote-unquote law. But it's also important because this ban could easily lead to a ban on AR-15s and other firearms. Right now that case is before the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, Ohio. We argued our case back in December, so we're waiting for a decision. I thought it went well. I thought it went really well. I was encouraged to see that liberal groups were very disheartened by how that hearing went. In fact, one of them said the judges seemed skeptical of the government's arguments in favor of the bump stock ban. This is not great. Well, for us, that's good news. When they think that's bad, that's good for us. In fact, one judge commented, he said, in the future, the ATF could choose to redefine a machine gun as including all semi-automatic weapons that can be modified with a device like a bump stock. And that's exactly been our point. Because if a bump stock somehow magically converts an AR-15, let's say, into a machine gun, then guess what? So do your belt loops. So do those rubber bands in your home. That means, the next Democrat administration will be able to say, well, if a bump stock can do it, so can the other things that are available in the house. That's why, around your house, that's why it is really important to defeat this in the courts. And so, anyway, if we win at the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the only next step would be the Supreme Court, and they only take 2% of the cases before them. So that this could be a very encouraging thing, but we'll of course be reporting on this as soon as we get word from the court. I could spend a lot more time talking about our legal work. There's other things we're doing. We've got a case before the Supreme Court. There's a lot going on. But let me go back with the time remaining that I want to just come back to this issue of elections, because we really have a great opportunity this year. Gun Owners of America is going to be involved in trying to take out a lot of anti-gun congressmen, taking away Pelosi's anti-gun majority. And of course, at the presidential level, boy, this is going to be key, because guess what happens if Bernie wins? You know what we get? We get to see gulags brought back. Did you see the Project Veritas undercover report where they interviewed several employees in the Sanders campaign? Many of them want to establish Soviet-style gulags here in our country. Why? So that people like you can be re-educated because you don't think right. I mean, isn't that just like a socialist? We will force you to think like us. By the way, you all and me have been lied to about the Soviet gulags. That you realize that's just a CIA lie. Because actually, they informed us, these staffers for the Bernie campaign, that people in the Soviet gulags got working wages. Oh, and they got conjugal visits too. So how bad could it be in a gulag? Can you think of any better reason for wanting to keep your AR-15s? Yeah, next time somebody says, why do you want an AR-15 for? You just tell them, well, people who don't want to be sent to a Soviet gulag. I mean, that's who would want an AR-15, right? Anyway, back to elections. We're in a presidential election year. So obviously, I would guess voter turnout is going to be higher. But I cannot overstate how important it is that we need to keep that same commitment level even during the off years, or even during the primaries. In Virginia, right after the November election, the governor said that and after this blue wave swept through Virginia, the governor said that he was open to gun confiscation. And with those words, that kicked off the Second Amendment sanctuary movement in Virginia. Since the election, 91 out of 95 counties have declared themselves to be sanctuaries for the Second Amendment. That's 95% of the counties. That's the highest percentage in any state in the Union. Great news. And that's great news and very exciting. People have been, we're actually breaking records, showing up at Board of Supervisor meetings, showing up by the hundreds, by the thousands, encouraging Board of Supervisors to pass these resolutions. Here's the bad news. There's always a little bad news sometimes with the good news. The bad news is we've heard coming out of these meetings, people saying, I really wish I'd voted in the November election. See, this is the problem. We get complacent. Republicans were killing gun control right and left in Virginia, and people get complacent. They think we've got this. It's not that important. They don't show up to vote. They're not getting others to vote. And all it takes is one election, and the blue wave sweeps in, and now we're fighting for our life in Virginia. We can't wait until our rights are on the chopping block to wake up. And I think that's the big message that we need to encourage people with. One of our goals at Gun Owners of America is to work ourselves out of a job. We would love to defeat gun control so handily, that GOA would never be needed again. I could go back to teaching. But here's the thing, GOA, those of us here at GOA and at BamaCarry, we can't save our gun rights if good people aren't showing up to vote. It's just not going to happen. Elections have consequences. And sometimes for some reason people just want to bypass the easier duties like showing up to vote, let's say, and they want to just jump straight into the revolution, And look, I'm all about the Second Amendment. I realize it's not about duck hunting, right? It's ultimately about self-defense against tyranny. But the problem is sometimes people want to jump from A to Z. I mentioned that and see, the founders didn't do that. I mentioned that I'd like to go back to teaching. That's what I do, by the way, in my other life. When it's not 9 to 5, I teach government students, or I teach high school students government before 9 o'clock and after 5 o'clock. So I'm a government teacher, but just recently my class was reading the Declaration of Independence, and as lovers of the Founding Fathers, as we all are, we love to focus on the juicy parts, right? We focus on the exciting battles of the Revolution. We took it to the British at Concord. We took it to them at Yorktown. But we tend to ignore those sections that just don't seem quite as sexy, such as when the founders said it was important to show restraint. Like, take this statement from the Declaration. Mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms of government to which they are accustomed. You hear that? They're saying, hey, it's wise not to go off half-cocked. You don't have to have a revolution every time you're suffering under some oppression. Be patient. See, that's not quite as exciting as quoting Thomas Jefferson who said we need to shed blood every 20 years with another rebellion. I'm splicing a couple of his quotes there, but you get the idea. That was Jefferson. Yes, it's true that throughout history there have been times, as the Declaration says, you have to dissolve the political bands that have connected you. And the Founding Fathers reached that point, to be sure, in the 1770s. But thankfully, we haven't reached that point today where armed resistance is necessary, not like it was necessary in 1775 at Lexington and Concord. Fortunately, there's still many, many opportunities to save our rights without yet having to resort to the cartridge box. Take the battle that we're fighting in Virginia, all right? The governor's minions have introduced dozens of bills to restrict our rights, and we're fighting them in the legislature. And we're winning some battles in the legislature. Hopefully we will beat him on his gun ban and magazine ban. We're very hopeful about that. But there are other battles that we won as well. And so we're fighting in the General Assembly. We're fighting them in the Court of Public Opinion. We're fighting at the county level where we're getting these Second Amendment sanctuaries passed. I mean, those are things that we're already doing right now. You know, we're making great strides, but it doesn't end there. You know, we're preparing, as I already mentioned, we're going to fight them in the courts. Our attorneys are already prepping their cases and, you know, looking, you know, for the best places and, you know, best plaintiffs. You know, we're mobilizing to fight back with our votes in the next election. And I hope that this huge rally that we just saw in Virginia is just the beginning of the tsunami that's going to not only start in Virginia. You know, it's kind of like we're taking one for the team in Virginia, but I think it's waking up a lot of people nationally, thank God. And, you know, but we're going to be fighting back by educating people as they sit on juries. You know, jury nullification is a legitimate option. When your friends and family are being accused of an immoral and unconstitutional law being enforced upon them, you know, juries have to know that they can say, we will not vote to convict. And so that's very important. So here's my point, though. Time and time again, we're going to be fighting the governor at every step. And that's how it works in a republic. You know, right? I mean, Ben Franklin said, they gave the people a republic if you can keep it. If you can keep it. See, that's the catch. We have to remain active. We can't get complacent. We've got to exercise every opportunity we can to peacefully protect our rights. We have to remain active, but not just we ourselves. We need to get others engaged. And I think that's been the recurring message that we're hearing from the speakers today. You know, our neighbors, our family, you know, we need to get others engaged. And yes, we have to call out the big guns too, just like George Washington did, on his knees, in the snow, next to his horse. There's a lot to be done. And I'm not just talking about my home state of Virginia. A lot to be done here in Alabama too. And I know in this room, you guys are doing a lot. And so I want to thank you for your activism. I want to thank you for helping to support the cause, support BamaCarry. Many of you supporting GOA. You're supporting good organizations that are fighting the fight. So together, now let's take it to the next level and let's make sure that we get even more people engaged in the fight. All right? Thank you, everybody.